All right, we're going to do Ralph Ellison's Battle Royal. Um, Ellison is. This is from the book Invisible Man. Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which is boy, I tell you what, right? Invisible Man. If you're making a sort of top 10 list of the greatest American novels. It's I'd say it's definitely top five, maybe top somewhere in the top five. Who cares? I guess after that, but it is. I would say it's probably the greatest African American novel we have. And Ellison, this would be, for a lot of people don't find him to be the easiest read. I actually like the sort of very allegorical and simplest sort of writing, and he's a tour de force as far as that kind of a writer. And this opening sort of chapter of that book, which is called Battle Royal, is just a feat of literary technique and grand writing. It really is. A really talented writer. A writer who, unfortunately never really produced another great work. He has a book, Juneteenth. Well, I've not read that book. I've heard mostly. Wasn't does not hold up to his first one, and sort of went into this. Just kind of a bit frozen the rest of his life. He was often accused of because he was so kind of a dazzling stylist that he wasn't in the way that Sir Richard Wright was. He was maybe not wasn't the didactic strident um, black writer the way people wanted to, almost like as if civil rights were the first thrust of his work. But boy, it's all over that book anyway, and I think that was an unfair criticism on Ellison. Anyway, to Battle Royal, what we have here is a young black man writes, and we get I don't know what about a fierce sort of voice, and that fierce voice is sort of the ghost of his grandfather in a way. And his grandfather had sort of a it opens sort of when the grandfather was dying, and he said, "I've been a traitor all my days ever since I gave up my gun after the Reconstruction." And he's talking about white people to his grandson. Again, it wasn't. This was not a warm, sentimental, cuddly sort of goodbye to his grandfather on the deathbed. And as the candles are guttering out, and the old man's dying. But again, this man had been a slave at one point in his life, his grandfather. And I tell you what, do what you need to. He goes, I've been a traitor all my days. He goes, you do what you need to. You yes him to death. Make him swallow you until they vomit or split their guts wide open. And basically, you just do what you have to do and say what you have to the white man. But don't ever let them think. Yeah, don't ever let them get inside you. Don't let them think you're someone other than you are, or that they're someone other than they are, or that they're any of those sorts of things. And that boy, say what you need to, but inside you be your own person as sort of something that's going to really haunt this young man. And basically, as far as a filter of interpretation, I think with these a couple of things to keep in mind. And again, one is just the pure allegory, which I'll be covering throughout these next few minutes. But the other thing, I think there are two sort of strains of African American thought kind of weaving in this piece. You have the Booker T. Washington, and Booker T. probably, I would say, a little, maybe not a real well-respected figure these days. It seems to be, especially among African American people, and somewhat understandably so. He preached a kind of conciliatory appeasements of white folks, and there was some. I don't remember all the essays, the titles of them, but one, when it says something like, "Listen, if all they're going to let you be is a carpenter, you know what? Make yourself invaluable, and make yourself the absolute best carpenters. They can't get by without you. At some point, they will, have to. You just keep doing that, and they will have to recognize you." There is a certain amount of naivete, in Booker T's. assumptions there, because that kind of did have to be forced out of them. No, they weren't really going to, the white power structure, the Jim Crow South, and places like that were not. They kind of had to be, forced to give up their power. They didn't give it up. They didn't just suddenly realize how good black carpenters were, and things like that. So it's understandable why people go at them. But for example, I wonder if it wouldn't work a little better, these days. We're not in the same place we were, say, when this story takes place. But listen, he also founded a black college. He did all kinds of great things, and even the things he got wrong, where maybe I'm giving him too much credit here for good intentions. I've had a lot of students come at me vigorously over this one. Maybe they're right. And it's not that I think he was right. There was obviously a lot of naivete, and I get why he gets slammed, but anyway, the other one, though, and again, Marcus Garvey would have been the other, the sort of opposition figure to Booker T, and Marcus Garvey was a black separatist. He was a real big man, Marcus Garvey, a guy who scared the bejesus out of a lot of the white men, frankly, and you could see why black people would more gravitate toward him. And again, these figures later on are going to be, maybe loosely, and I do not think this is very inexact too, would be, maybe Martin Luther King Jr. would be Booker T, although that's very unfair to Martin Luther King Jr., who absolutely forced conflict. He may have been non-violent, he was not non-confrontational, but he was certainly the more peaceable person. Then obviously Malcolm X would have been the figure in the 60s, and I think Malcolm X, and at least the fieriest. There's a couple iterations of Mr. Malcolm X, obviously, but the one I think most of us think about, that real fiery one on television, thundering away of William F. Buckley and people like that, I think it probably is fairly close to Marcus Garvey. Anyway, Marcus Garvey basically wanted I think it might have been the Pacific Southwest to be basically New Africa or whatever. They listen, all this free labor we gave and everything, black people to get there. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. That would have never worked, and it's silly, and that's not. It would have. That would have led to just more bloodshed. People never. It wouldn't have, and going back to the motherland was a big thing for him too. And again, so I don't think either, maybe two flawed men, two very different strains of thought on how black people should move forward. But here we get a young a man who, again, he's the valedictorian of his all-black high school, brilliant kid, and he's going to go, and he's sort of, he can't go to college unless he gets this scholarship. And it's all the sort of men of power in this school, and that are hopefully going to give him his sorry, give me a second. He's going to get a scholarship, and so he's going to give a speech here. And he shows up to this place, and it turns out it's what's called a smoker. These things really happen, by the way, and it's a sort of like stag party that was like a monthly get together of all these sort of rich white guys in town, and and then basically they're getting hammered. There they get, they smoke and they drink, and they have like a big meal, and they kind of carry on. It's sort of a big boys night out. And again, it's all the high school superintendent is there, and the guy who owns the most successful car dealership is in there, and I think a guy who owns the movie. All the business owners and the leading politicians in town and things like that. So it's all the well-heeled guys, and they're going to give this scholarship to this young black scholar, so he walks in expecting, and he's nervous, and he really wants them. He's worked on this speech, and by the way, the speech he's going to give is very much the Booker T. Washington speech, which is why I gave you all that just a few minutes ago. And about black responsibility is what is sort of the theme of his speech. And he walks in and was, well, boy, hey, come on in, and this is sort of down south. And so here, well, you're here now, you may as well get on it, you can get into the battle royal. And again, he's there, this is a geeky sort of kid, and all of a sudden he realizes he's with all these other players. These are all the tough kids in his neighborhood. These are the kids he's probably been avoiding on his way home most of his life, right? And he doesn't quite understand what's going on. they're all basically they have to kind of strip. They just have they're all given trunks, I guess, and they're all kind of stripped naked, except for the trunks. They're in boxing trunks, and then they realize they are given gloves. They have one hand tied behind their back. They get the other hand with a boxing glove, and they are going to be blindfolded, put into a ring, and they're going to have to sort of slug each other. And the last one standing gets a prize money. Meanwhile, again they're. First of all, they're marched out there, and again, these are young, teenage, 20-something, virulent, right, young black males. They're right out. The first thing he sees is a magnificent blonde, as he describes, right, and there's music, and he's not quite sure what it is. It turns out it's a stripper, and there she is, and there's a music, sultry music playing, and some of these, guys who are already a bit lit, sort of gyrating in sort of obscene ways, and making kind of jerks of themselves, and the girl's sort of dancing, and she's completely naked, and he's having, and again, these young black males who, again, other than him, are some of the toughest. They volunteered to be there, okay, just because they were guaranteed at least $5, and so they are all there. And waiting to as they're going in, and they have they are terrified of this girl, these kids, and one of them starts crying, asking for his mother. They're scared to look at her, and again she's gorgeous, as described, this stripper, right? But she is white and blonde, and again, the guys in the audience are all surrounded the boys, and again, you can't help think they're sort of older, using this sort of young black bodies as a sort of surrogate, some sort of vicarious, erotic, weird thing going on there, right? And they say, you better look, you better not look, and they don't know what, the word niggers being tossed around. It's getting this sort of, and their response, these young black men, as they're half naked, seeing this nude woman, is terror, not being turned on, right? But he has quite a reaction to her, and is sort of like, he thinks she's just looking at him. He said he wants to kill her, he wants to make love to her, it's just this cauldron of sort of emotions, both the natural sort of erotic drive of his young body, as well as the cultural programming he's been living under, and it really was something to sort of watch. And then finally, she gets tossed off like a beach ball by these drunken guys, and a couple guys finally sort of get her out of there. And then at one point, they lock eyes, and she's sort of terrified too. And he sort of he sort of connects with that white woman right there in a different way, because he realizes she thinks they're monsters as well. And anyway, they do finally get her off. They get the kids into the ring. He's blindfolded, and they just sort of start slugging it out. And the whole time, by the way, he's still practicing his speech. And again, and he's being a little clueless here. That I hope they like my speech. He still wants these guys' approval, even after seeing this. Which again, remember those words from his grandfather warning him: "Do not let them get into your head." Right? But these are the revered men in his town. If you're a young guy with the ambition, he wants to be something like these guys are, right? I mean, those are in some ways in the town he lives as role models. So anyway, the fight starts, and he takes a few shots, and he kind of and again, he's smart. He's the smartest one in that ring. He's not the toughest though, but he is the smartest. And he kind of tightens and loses his facial muscles, so his blindfold actually comes down a little bit, and you kind of see a little bit. And he would hit one and kind of back up, and then they would go at each other. And he wasn't fighting with a lot of honor, maybe being a little sneaky, but he was being kind of smart about it. He really doesn't belong in the ring with these kids. Anyway, but again, a lot of violent, a lot of scary language being tossed at them. He's fairly light-skinned, some guy, I think, will say, "Get in there, you ginger nigga," or something. I mean, real the language being thrown around these kids. I mean, it's ugly. But eventually, he's sort of making his way, and again, he's able to see a little bit where the others weren't, because he was clever enough to being able to sort of figure out a way to loosen his blindfold. And again, he's going to be his role throughout this whole novel, by the way, the one who sort of sees through things, right? And again, you can't miss the symbolism there about all these young black males, bludgeoning each other for the entertainment, while the white guys stand around laughing. But it ends up being him and just this one other guy. The other kids were all annoyed at him because he basically cheated. As they saw it, one of their friends out of $5, and they don't like him because he's this sort of a geeky, bookish sort. They end up leaving him alone. They work it out between them to sort of knock each other out and leave him alone with this guy Tatlock, who's the toughest of them all. And he tries to get Tatlock to sort of throw in a match for him because he wants to impress the other guys. By the way, he's getting punched in the. He has to give a speech. He's bleeding out of his mouth. He's starting to, his lips are starting to swell. He's going numb, and eventually he gets knocked out by Tadlock. And then all right, boys, come on down. And then they go, here's some money, and they throw a bunch of coins on a rug, and the kids again are all hot and sweaty, and they all leap onto the rug, and it turns out the rug was electrified, so his ordeal isn't quite done yet. And they're all jumping and they're laughing, and again this sort of humiliation as they're all fending for coins, right? That the white men are just sort of tossing to them. Really can't be missed. And again, he's sort of observing all this, and he's sort of getting it. The other, I mean, it's not like the other kids are being fooled, by the way, by what's going on. They're just like they've kind of, this is the way the world is, as far as they're concerned. 1 second. And that finally ends now, and now he's still like trying to practice his speech, right? And they do at long last sort of give him a chance for a speech, and he goes up and he sort of. And none of the guys are listening to him. They've been drinking for quite a while now, and they're sort of like, a couple are heckling him. The others are sort of talking and not paying any attention while he's trying to give his. And he desperately, his fate is in their hands. He can't go to college the way he wants, which is where this kid belongs. If they don't give him the scholarship, but he's trying to give his speech. He's like, "What's that, boy? Can't hear you. What's that, boy?" He's nervous. He's scared. He's having trouble speaking because his mouth is filling with blood. And he's swallowing it, and he's getting sick from the coppery taste of the blood as he's swallowing his, the blood from his mouth. And he keeps trying to, talking about like racial, humility and personal responsibility, and put yourself up by your bootstraps kind of speech, that Booker T speech. And then at one point he sort of gets nervous and he stumbles and he says racial equality by accident instead of racial humility. And as what was that? But the whole room, and now all of a sudden they heard him. The whole room goes silent. They're staring at him. And again, man, he has to be terrified sitting there. He's in a very dangerous place right now. And sorry, I meant, are you sure you weren't being funny now? Where you, son? We'll do right by you. You got to know your place at all times. That's what they say to us. Oh, no, sir. And again, even as he's trying to say, racial, in that moment, as he's trying to say racial humility, his mouth is filling with blood. He can't even get the Booker T words out physically. Again, you can't miss the allegory there, and but he sort of straightens it out, and they come up and they do give him they give him a briefcase, and inside it is his scholarship, and he's so overcome with appreciation that he starts to tear up. And again, his grandfather's voice is starting to rise back up and sort of into the back of his mind again. And he looks down, and a rope of bloody saliva, as is described, drips onto his leather briefcase and seemed to form the shape of a new continent. And wow, what an image there by Ellison. You can't, the new continent, almost like the motherland of Africa, where Marcus Garvey, the other black, intellectual, towering intellectual of the day is sort of preaching about, even though he's trying to give the Booker T for these guys. And again, he'd always done it, appease white men, just more, he didn't really mean it. He kept telling himself he didn't mean it, but it was just the thing he needed to do, and which is probably accurate for the world this kid is growing up in. But now it's all sort of seeming to come apart. But he does get out of the room. He got his scholarship. Family's happy. But that night he has a dream, and he sees his, and even in the living room, the portrait of his dead grandfather seems to be like following him around the room, almost like the Mona Lisa. And that night he has a dream, and his grandfather's in the dream, and he said he's seen all those papers. It's that the briefcase he got with a bunch of papers in it. Them's years, the old man says. They were at a circus, actually, and there was clowns at the circus, and the grandfather would not laugh at the clowns, right? And he keeps opening envelopes. It's one of those things. Every time he opens an envelope, there's another envelope inside and outside. Well, almost like those Russian, those nested dolls. And finally, he gets to the last one. He opens it, and it's from his grandfather, and it just says, "To whom it may concern, keep this nigger boy running." And he says, "I woke with the old man's laughter ringing in my ears." And that is how this starts, and that is how this young man's adventure, which is going to be remarkable and tragic, begins. And it's just a real tour de force by Ralph